Hi everyone, and welcome to Module 1's lecture. Today we're going to be talking about food and society and the interactions between those and identity. So really, we're talking about food and people. So has been identified as the intimate commodity. We take it into our bodies multiple times a day. Sometimes we share it with other people. And those are kind of things that make it very personal to us. Our food choices, our food preferences, they are very personal. And that kind of creates a lot of controversies surrounding what is healthy, what is not healthy, what kinds of foods to eat, what kinds of foods not to eat. Now, there are also three basic tenets regarding food and society. We're going to talk about each of these three in a few seconds, but they are comfort foods, cultural capital, and the idea that food is complex. There's a lot going on here. So the idea of comfort foods, for briefly we'll talk about this. Comfort foods are foods that invoke a feeling of familiarity. They're foods that you recognize, that make you feel safe. They provide an emotional boost, that safety, that happiness. They make you feel good. However, a lot of times we eat comfort foods alone. Now this is because when we're alone, we are experiencing feelings of loneliness, sadness, things like that. And eating these foods make you feel connected to a group that you're a part of. They may connect you back to your family. They may connect you to a group of friends or a specific time and place when you were doing something that made you feel good. Now, often they're convenient. So sometimes comfort foods have gotten the bad rap of being junk foods. They do not have to be. They can be foods that just make you feel good. Now, cultural capital is the idea that food plays a major part of social life. Now, the focus here is that there are differences in eating patterns that can help distinguish different social groups. For example, some things that distinguish social groups: table settings. Some social groups have more complex table settings than others. Different food preferences. That's the idea that there's that interplay of your culture, your background, your history, and the food choices you make. Also, in meal preparation. So, the third piece here was that the idea that there's a complex relationship to and with foods. So, food choices are often have a piece of morality associated with them. The idea that a pregnant mother is eating for two, and if she's not eating well or eating a balanced diet, she's not doing her moral duty for her unborn child. Not saying that's right or wrong here. What I'm saying is that that is a thought that people have, that food choices have a moral implication. We also try to figure out what are good foods and bad foods. And as we kind of move along, you'll kind of learn about me that I'll really believe that there is no such thing as a good food or a bad food. It's all about how often you eat them and how much of them you eat. Um, Now, it's difficult with food because there is no unified theory that kind of links how food and society interact. It really is very fluid, it's very dynamic, and that this complexity really can confuse people when we as nutrition professionals are trying to provide advice. You may have one belief on something and come from a cultural perspective that is very different from a person you are working with. That can create some difficulty in communication that we as nutrition professionals need to be aware of and address when we're working with people. Now, the next thing I kind of want to touch on here is the idea of foodways. Now, to define foodways, that might not be a word you've kind of heard before. It's an idea that patterns that are established with what we eat and what causes us to eat. Now, that may seem a little bit willy-nilly, iffy-wiffy, but we're going to kind of discuss this a little bit more in the different aspects of what foodways entail. So there are three guiding principles to foodways. First is the idea is that they're heterogeneous. They are produced by a huge array of forces. You're having interactions between individuals, social institutions, and the environment, all of which are coming together to form your foodway, what you choose to eat and how you choose to eat it. The second principle is that they reflect and shape social inequalities. So they're used to maintain inequalities respective to things like gender, social class, race, sexuality, age. For example, it is often seen as a more feminine role to prepare foods for a family. And the idea that these food pathways kind of enhance that belief. or that men and women eat differently. Men eat heavier, more meats, whereas women tend to eat lighter and less meat. Not saying again that that is what is, but that is what is thought and what is seen, and how these foodways kind of really engender that continuation of inequalities potentially, and maybe even shape new ways of society. Additionally, foodways are dynamic. As we talked about on the last slide, things are constantly in flux. Meanings associated with food are consistently changing. For example, if you think about lobster in Maine, it used to be associated as a low class kind of peasant food fed to prisoners, and now lobster costs a lot of money across the country and it's a highly sought after delicacy for some people. That's a change. That's that dynamic relationship of the foodway. Now, we're going to talk about different kinds of identities and how food impacts those identities and how things like that. So, identity work is a theory that defines who we are both socially and culturally. So, food can really act as a status symbol. For example, people that can afford to eat fruits and vegetables that are fresh out of season may be seen as having more money. People with more money may choose to eat rare and unique foods. So also with personal identity, we have rituals. Everyone's family has that idea of certain foods that are eaten at certain times. So two brief examples are here. I have Thanksgiving and Christmas. So I'm sure all of you that celebrate either one of these holidays or another holiday that you celebrate would notice that your family, your group of friends, has a set types of food that are consumed at these different events. Now, they change over time, but I'm sure if you think about it for a second, you can think of specific foods that if you were celebrating a holiday or a special event and that food wasn't there, it would feel like a piece of you was missing from that. There's also the idea that food provides a social solidarity. Now, this would be things like people that have very specific eating patterns, such as vegans, people who only eat organic. Those people can kind of identify with each other on the basis that I'm a vegan or I only eat organic. Now, there are other identities than the individual identity that are associated and impacted with foodways. There are national identities. Once again, here I chose Thanksgiving as an example. So Thanksgiving was developed to kind of reunite, let's change that, not developed. Thanksgiving was kind of implemented in a nationwide fashion to reunite the nation after the Civil War. And so that's an identity in the United States that we as a country celebrate Thanksgiving on that day together. There are regional identities that are impacted. Now, these stem from local food agriculture. They're foods that are grown in specific areas that identify that area. For example, in Maine, we would do blueberries, lobster, things like that. Those are main kind of identified foods. You also have racial and cultural identities that are impacted by foodways. Now, these are impacted by things that come from your ancestral past. You also have social class identity, and that goes back to this idea of like table settings and manners at the table and different rules and things that impact how people eat at a table. Gender identity is impacted by foodways. Who's cooking? Who eats light or heavy food choices? And domestic outsourcing. Now, this is an interesting idea. Domestic outsourcing is the idea that as a society, for the most part, many of us are eating out more rather than preparing foods at home. We are outsourcing those food preparation things, and it's impacting what we eat, and how our health is impacted by our food. Now, as a kind of brief kind of synopsis of where the end of this is coming for this lecture, we're going to talk about the idea of culinary tourism. So we've talked about how food impacts your culture and culture impacts your food. But as we move forward, many people are wanting to experience other cultures. Now, we cannot truly understand someone else's cultural identity. We can learn about it, we can try to experience it, but it is not ours. So that's the idea that it's tourism. We are visiting them through their food, visiting their culture, their traditions through their food. We are also watching others eat with this. So I'm sure many of you have seen shows on TV where chefs go to other countries, different locations, and they try specific regional foods. They try new foods to them, interesting foods that are not commonly available or accepted as traditional in the United States. We're watching them eat. We are visiting those cultures through those people eating. However, a big thing about this is that we want authenticity. We want to believe that our exposure to these cultures is authentic. Now, that's kind of interesting because many people, I would assume, have gone to, let's say, Chinese restaurants in America. The majority of American Chinese restaurants are very Americanized food. They are not the food that they would eat in China. However, these restaurants will often put decorations, colors, music that would make someone feel like they're having an authentic experience, even if they're not truly having that authentic experience. So, throughout the assignments and readings this week, after watching this lecture, I really want you to be thinking about your own cultural identity, your own food identities, and what's shaping and what's impacting the food choices you make. And we'll be coming back next week to talk further about other things and move forward. But I'm really excited to read the discussion posts and your assignments this week about you and your cultures. Have a great week.